Okay, picking up with part two of our conversation with Checker, as he's known to everybody who knows and loves him, Checker Finn. You were mentioning at the end of part one that you feel abandoned by both parties as you look back over decades. What you were abandoned by the Democrats, I guess, what, in the late 70s?
In the McCarthy era.
Oh, okay. All right. And the abandonment by the Republicans of you is more recent within the
Yes,
past
exactly.
couple of years. And you did mention as well in the public, you thought there were some good conservative public intellectuals who were in the vein of Irving Kristol, whom you mentioned. And of course, philanthropy funds much of what goes on in the world of public intellectuals by providing people the largesse to be a public intellectual. What can conservative philanthropy do moving forward to prevent you from feeling so abandoned and people who might agree with you from feeling so abandoned, if anything?
A lot of conservative philanthropy lately is veering toward a kind of libertarianism that I think is a cousin of populism that I worry about. And that the support of, call it, traditional institutions and the improvement of traditional institutions and the making of public policies that direct governmental programs in better ways, a lot of this is being neglected by conservative philanthropy now. More in the interest of, I don't know, individual empowerment or everybody do their own thing. And I detect as well a kind of a loosening of interest in, just call it, public policy. At the Fordham Institute, where I'm still connected, we find fundraising harder in the policy realm, because the foundations we've traditionally gone to for support in policy research, call it, and policy advocacy, seem to be less interested in that, whether they're liberal or conservative. They're more interested in either direct services on the part of the left, for the most part, or these kind of sort of libertarian atomism, if even on the right. So I think there's a need here for. I think if Irving Kristol were alive today, he would say, let's straighten up and fly right, conservative philanthropy. The battles that you were waging 10 and 20 years ago, progress was made, but the battlefield has not been abandoned by the other side. So you better not abandon it yourself. Progressivism is alive and well and kicking hard, and conservatism, if there is such a thing today, needs to push at least as hard in the other direction, which is not the same as vacating the field of battle in order to everybody do their own thing.
Tell me more about libertarianism as a cousin of populism with empowerment. I mean, I want to know how school choice isn't that, if it were, but I don't know that they would see themselves as cousins so much. But
so some conservative foundations that we might go to now in pursuit of support to advance school choice as a public policy, that is to say, more charter schools, more voucher schools, more things like that. The response we're getting back is, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're looking for grassroots initiatives in which people are doing self-help kinds of things, and not through the public sphere. Really more like looking for people to be doing things in private. And that's the distinction I think I'm making here.
Yeah. Okay. How is school choice doing since Dan Schmidt's retired from Bradley in 2017? What's the state of school choice?
Well, the state of school choice is mixed. If you just look at sheer numbers, it's looking good in terms of the numbers of charter schools, the numbers of voucher programs, tax credit programs, state by state, and some new forms of school choice that kind of materialized during the COVID shutdown. These pods that people are creating, so that 8 kids can be taught by a privately hired teacher And in some states, the public dollars will pay for that privately hired teacher. So there are new forms of school choice emerging. So kind of at the practical, numerical, quantitative level, school choice is looking good. But what's happening at the political level is stronger pushback from the so-called progressives and their friends in the unions than I have seen in a long time, and a real loss of the kind of bipartisanship that was supporting at least some forms of school choice. We now have a whole lot of Democratic members of the U.S. House of Representatives on the warpath against charter schools, would be the best example, which they weren't 10 years ago. Charter schools were the quintessential bipartisan education reform. Incidentally, we're on the lip of the 30th anniversary of the first charter school law in America, which was Minnesota's in 91. And we've got 7,000 charter schools, but we've also got something that used to draw Democrats and Republicans both to vote for it in Congress and in the legislatures. Now that's not happening, and as nearly as much. And we're getting real opposition, and the unions have got fresh wind in their sails, partly with the Biden team. I think we're gonna see some real ebbing away of Democratic support for school choice, which just means that school choice is not going to be in good shape in a lot of states or at the federal level. I wasn't in great shape at the federal level to start with, but the Supreme Court's doing some good work in this realm. They've had a couple of decisions that have, I would say, advanced school choice, and there's another one coming up that bears on religious education. So that's not a bad thing. But the bipartisanship that we talked about in the first part of this conversation that was ebbing is ebbing from behind school choice too.
Checker, could I just turn to curricular issues?
Yes.
And I'm thinking now of your commentary on your mentor when you were a student and then as a colleague, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and his background, his personal background, his family, where he came from, what influences he had on his life in terms of the environment around him. And I'm thinking here in particular of history and civics. I'd like a few comments from you, if you'd be willing to offer some on sort of, not just on the curriculum itself and talk about critical race and all these sort of things, but sort of, is there an investment in a conversation about an understanding, given, of course, what's being taught or what they're proposing to teach in history and civics, or not teach at all? Is there a feel, and I'm thinking here of the emotional kind of story that a Daniel Patrick Moynihan could tell, or many people could tell, even us as second generation or third generation, with respect to taking policy out of immigration, how people got here, what they thought of getting here, what kind of land they thought they were getting to. What's your sense of sort of the emotional investment that needs to be made that maybe isn't being made with respect to getting it right, even though things aren't always right in curriculum? Do you see that as a problem, Checker, with respect to where we are today?
I do see it as a problem. I see the fundamental mission of schools, and the immigrants knew this, was to create citizens, was to form American citizens. It wasn't just to teach STEM subjects and phonics. Those are important, but citizens need to be forged, not just by schools, by many influences in the lives of people, of course. But forming citizens involves teaching things like history and civics, and modeling things like history and civics in the school, not just didactic, and doing it in a purposeful way. We want you to understand these things in order that you can be a good citizen when you grow up. That's not happening, and instead we're arguing over, is it 1619 or 1776 in the history curriculum, and we're arguing over so-called action civics on the civics side, rather than citizenship requiring both knowledge and an investment of commitment. And yeah, that incorporates participation, which some would call action civics, but that's not the whole story. So we're fighting over the wrong things in history and civics. instead of saying, what does it take to build a citizen for tomorrow? That and people's stories, including immigrant stories, including these up by the bootstrap stories, are worth telling here if people are still willing to learn from examples and not just say, oh, that's a dead white male whose story you're telling me. There's Dan Schmidt, a live white male. Why should we listen to his story? He doesn't look like me.
I will accept that flattery.
Yeah. So Checker, what was your dissertation on for Daniel Patrick Moynihan? Those many years ago.
Oh God, the doctoral dissertation was on the making of education policy in the Nixon White House, which also happened to be my day job.
Oh, so it was a journal.
It was essentially a journal with some analysis, and then it turned into a short book called Education and the Presidency, which looked at how education policy making went on in the White House up through Nixon, let's say, which is a relatively short history because education policy making, there wasn't much of it before LBJ. Though there's a very interesting little footnote here. It goes back to Abraham Lincoln, because the first federal education legislation worth mentioning, other than the Northwest Ordinance, happened during the Lincoln administration, when they created the Morrill Land Grant Act to support public universities. And they also, believe it or not, created something in the federal government called the Department of Education. Now, that was just a little statistical agency at the time, but that was Lincoln. But by and large, we then skip to the GI Bill, and then we skip to LBJ. So it was the education policy making in the White House was that period of time.
Great. Well, why don't we end on that footnote and thank Checkerfin so much for joining us. We totally appreciate your time, and we will, if we can rustle them up, we'll get you some Giving Review refrigerator magnets. They're quite functional and elegant.
I'd rather have Dan Schmidt's recent writing.
Well, we're going to send you that link, and it's funny because as I was promising you the refrigerator, is it okay if I'm looking at my refrigerator? Is it okay if they're certified pre-owned?
Certified pre-owned? Well, it depends on who's touched them recently. Remember, we're in a pandemic.
All right, we will. Let me work on that. But thanks so much for joining us, Checker.
My pleasure. All the best. Bye-bye.
Great. And now, he hung up, so he finished it there. Okay, so we're done. No follow-up with Checker. Okay, Dan. Well, I think we were okay there.
Yeah. Was my question okay? I stepped on in the first part. I apologize.
Yeah, but that was fine. I was going to ask him the dissertation question. Then it's good we ended with that. So, okay. All right. I'll send him.
I think was my Moynihan question intelligible?
Yeah. He looks good, actually. He's the same. Yeah.
He had this, I don't know if he's working for them. He had this, that I think the initials of the thing that he goes on these, exotic, kayak trips and all. I noticed the letters, they were Z.
Well, they probably give it to him for free, right?
Yeah, so he was smart enough to, well, if we only had an audience, it would have been good, but I don't think we have enough audience to have people ask what that was. But, he's as sharp as always. And I wish we could show this to Bradley. I mean, it wasn't that much, just the time is so short, but the way he ended and some of the things he said earlier in response to you about where the libertarian slant and all that, that was, of course, that was for us already by 2002, 2003, when he hired Jan, he was already bowing to that. And I think he realized he was off the track